guys, yasas kefalotiri to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're making moussaka. Moussaka is classic Greek comfort food. It is one of the most popular Greek dishes and it is one of my all-time favorites. It's delicious, has layers of potatoes and eggplant, a delicious hearty meat sauce, and then there's a creamy bechamel on top. So many layers of flavors, so much goodness, all in one dish. You can make it ahead and freeze it, which is a really good idea because you are going to put in a good amount of effort, so might as well make a double batch and have it in the freezer and ready to go. Let's get started. So we're going to start off by preparing the eggplants. So you want to make sure that the skin is nice and shiny, they're not squishy or overly hard. This is a good example of what they should look like. These are nice and fresh. So if you find the Japanese eggplants, which are the long, light purple ones, those are really tender and are perfect for this dish, but these work as well. If you're not a fan of eggplant, then go ahead and substitute zucchini. When I was little, I used to not like eggplant actually. So my aunt used to make this dish with zucchini for me, and it is just so delicious. Just cut the eggplants into rounds. About ½ inch in thickness will do. So I'm going to slice the rest of them, but when you're done, what you're going to do is you're going to layer them either in a colander or in a baking tray, and you're going to sprinkle them generously with some salt. This is going to help draw out that bitter water that's inside of eggplants. You want to get rid of that. And we're doing this first, so that way while we're preparing the rest of the components, everything is going to be ready together. So I'm going to continue slicing these other two eggplants. If you have two bigger eggplants, 2 will be enough. These are smaller, so I'm using 3. I'm going to continue slicing these and salting them. Then I'm going to set them aside for about 20 to 30 minutes, and we're going to move on to the next step. So next I have 3 russet potatoes or baking potatoes, and I've already peeled them. Let me just dry them so that way they're easy to slice. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to cut these into rounds. And then these are going to go on a baking tray. They're going to get drizzled with a couple tablespoons of olive oil. Seasoned on both sides with some salt and a little pinch of ground black pepper. And I'm also going to go ahead and sprinkle some dried oregano on top. So traditionally these are deep fried, but I'm not going to do that because I like the taste of oven roasted potatoes so much better. Plus, while they're roasting in the oven, you can make the meat sauce, which is what we're going to do next. The oven is preheated to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. These are going to go in and bake on the center rack for about 20-25 minutes or until they're fork tender. Okay, so now we're going to move on to making the meat sauce. We're going to need 1 onion that I'm just going to finely chop. So go ahead and add the onion to a big skillet or a big pot. Make sure that it's going to fit not just the onion, but also 2 pounds of ground beef, which is what we're going to add once the onion is nice and golden. This meat sauce is one that I make at least once a week. I usually have a batch or 2 in the freezer because it freezes for months and you can use it literally in anything. I have so many recipes with it on the site, and I'll try to link as many as I can on the blog post. But I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of olive oil to the onions and a little pinch of salt to help them cook down. They're going to cook over medium heat for about 10 minutes or until they're nice and soft and golden. So next we're going to add some grated garlic. If you freshly grate your garlic, you're going to need about 5-6 cloves. Just grate them. Otherwise, a teaspoon. What I like to do is I like to grate a whole bunch, freeze it, and then I take it out and I just break off chunks and put it in food. It's so easy. It would be about a heaping teaspoon, but who really measures garlic? I feel like that should be against the law. The more the better. Okay, then I'm going to add 2 pounds of ground beef. Now, lean ground beef is best for this. This is 85-15, 85% lean, 15% fat. This is all I had, so that's what I'm using. I'm just going to break it up and just brown it just a little bit. Okay, it's almost there, and you can substitute ground turkey, ground chicken, ground lamb, whatever ground meat you like. Go ahead and substitute that if you don't have the beef or don't like the beef. We're going to season with a little bit of salt, some freshly cracked black pepper, pinch of crushed red pepper flakes because we like heat. Now, it is very traditional to add cinnamon and nutmeg to this, and some people even like to add a little bit of allspice. All 3 spices I don't add. I don't add any of them because my kids won't eat it if they taste cinnamon in it or if they taste any of those spices. But if you do want to add it, you would add about 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon and about 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. I always go light on the nutmeg just because it is so strong. But I don't put any of it in there, but you could. And then I have a can of pureed tomatoes. I'm going to add that. And we waste nothing. So I added some water to the can to rinse out whatever is left in there. Now I'm going to cook this over medium-high heat until the sauce thickens, all the water dries up, and the meat sauce is ready. It should be ready in about 20 minutes or so. And I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So while the meat sauce is cooking, I moved it to the back stove so we can pan fry the garlic, I was going to say, the eggplant. So the eggplant has released some water because of the salt that we sprinkled on top. You just want to pat that dry. Heat up a large skillet with some oil, and we're going to pan fry them until they're nice and golden and soft. I prefer the pan frying method over the oven method. Now, I've done a video in the past, and I did bake the eggplant. There are a few issues with that. It's perfectly good if you want to do a little bit of a healthier twist to this recipe, but you're going to have to use so many baking trays, which means you're going to have a lot of things to wash at the end, and they just never get as soft and tender as they do when you pan fry them. So do take a little bit of the extra effort and pan fry them like I am going to do right now. I have a cast iron skillet, which is my favorite because it retains heat evenly. It's heating over medium heat. I'm going to add some olive oil. Now you need to add a good amount so you can coat the bottom of the pan. Eggplant really does like to absorb the oil. Don't worry about it. It's going to make it really nice and just it's going to melt in your mouth. It's going to be so delicious. But if it gets nice and hot, it won't absorb that much, if that makes sense. So let's wait for this to get a little warmer. So the oil is nice and hot. I'm going to carefully add in the eggplants, and I'm going to cook them on both sides until they're nice and golden all around and really nice and soft in the center. And once they're done, you want to put them on a tray or on a plate that's lined with paper towels so that way it can absorb the oil. I'm just using the same tray that I baked the potatoes in. I just scooted them to the side so that way I don't have more things to wash. I just put paper towel on one side of the tray, and that's where the eggplants are going to drain on. The meat sauce is ready. The eggplants are fried. Potatoes are ready. Last thing that's left to make is the bechamel sauce. Now I'm going to taste the meat sauce before we move on just so I can make sure there's enough salt. I did go ahead and I sprinkled some dried oregano on top. It's best to put the oregano at the end so that way you don't get a little bit of that bitterness that oregano tends to leave behind. But if you don't have oregano, you could also substitute freshly chopped parsley. About 3 or 4 tablespoons will do. That is perfect. I'm going to set it aside, let it cool a bit. I'm going to let the eggplants cool a bit, and we're going to make the bechamel sauce now. So we're going to begin with 3/4 of a cup of olive oil. You can use butter instead, so it would be 3/4 of a cup of melted butter. And we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour. We're going to cook this over medium heat for a few minutes until the flour is nice and toasted. This is going to be the thickening agent. Bechamel is basically a creamy custard. That's the best way to describe it. It's that white sauce that we all know and love. That's on top of pasticcio, on top of moussaka. It's so creamy and delicious, and I like to go heavy on the cheese, so that way it's also cheesy. So we're going to cook this down for a few minutes. Once you start to smell the flour become toasted, then go ahead and add 5 cups of milk. Whole milk is best, but use whatever you have. Just make sure that it's cold and whisk it immediately. That's 4 cups. I need to add 1 more. Whisk it immediately so that way the flour mixture just, mixes in right. Okay, now we're going to season it with a little bit of salt. Not too much because we're going to also add Parmesan cheese in there, and Parmesan cheese, as we all know, is already nice and salty. We're going to add some freshly cracked black pepper and about 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. I go light on the nutmeg because it is a really strong spice and I don't want it to overpower the dish. Now we're going to cook this over medium heat until this almost comes to a boil. Once that happens, it's going to thicken really quickly. So while that is cooking, I'm going to get the eggs ready. So we're going to need 2 egg yolks and 2 whole eggs. So I'm going to save the whites. I'm just going to beat them a little bit. And once the milk mixture is ready, we're going to temper these before we add them to the sauce. Okay, I'm beginning to see a little bit of boiling beginning to happen. And it feels much thicker. As you can see, as it sits, it is going to thicken even more. I'm going to take it off of the heat now. And I'm going to pour a little bit into the eggs while I'm whisking. This is going to bring their temperature up, and it's going to keep them from turning to scrambled eggs because we want these eggs to add a nice luxurious silkiness to the sauce. You don't want curdled scrambled eggs in your bechamel. That should be enough. We're just going to add the eggs to the milk mixture and whisk it in well. And you see, as it sits, it does thicken even more. And then I like to grab a big handful of Parmesan cheese. If you have kefalotiri, which is a Greek type of Gruyere cheese, you can use that instead. I use the Parmesan because it's so much easier to find. But if you live near a Mediterranean or a Greek specialty food store, get yourself some and use that instead. It has a much nuttier flavor and it's really good. Okay, and now I'm just going to mix the cheese in. And the bechamel is ready. Everything is ready. Now we're going to layer it together. So I have a 13-inch round baking dish. It's unconventional. The best thing to use is a 9 by 13-inch rectangular baking dish, something that you would use for lasagna. This is what I have right now, so that's what I'm using. I'm just going to take a little handful of breadcrumbs. These are unseasoned panko breadcrumbs, but whatever kind of breadcrumbs you have that are unseasoned will work. They're going to help absorb any moisture that might be in the food. So just put a little layer there on the bottom. You don't have to grease the pan or anything like that. And then we're going to take all of the potatoes and we're going to create a layer on the bottom. 3 potatoes are not enough, especially when your family starts snacking on them as they come out of the oven. I'm probably going to be short on potatoes and have to put some eggplants in between. So definitely roast some more potatoes. It's one of those things that's just such a yummy snack. Everybody just grabs a few. And then when it's time to put the meal together, you're not going to have enough. Then we're going to take the eggplants. Actually, before we take the eggplants, I like to do a layer of cheese each step of the way. So I'm going to sprinkle some Parmesan cheese on top. Then I'm going to put a layer of eggplants on top of the potatoes. Now, if you were using zucchini, this is when the zucchini would go in. Then a little sprinkling of Parmesan cheese. Now we're going to take all of the meat sauce and we're going to distribute it on top. Just make one even layer. A little bit of cheese. And then we're going to do another layer with all of the remaining eggplants. A layer of cheese. And then the bechamel. You want to put this in the oven and bake it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes or to an hour until the top is nice and golden and bubbly. Then it needs to come out of the oven and it has to rest for about 45 minutes before you cut into it. I mean, if you don't want to wait that long, if you want to serve it from oven to table, you're going to have to scoop it out. It's going to look messy. But if you want to have really nice slices, it'll still stay warm for probably 2-3 hours. Just wait an hour before you serve it. It's hard, but trust me, it'll be worth it. So while that's in the oven baking, I'm going to clean up over here, but let's go over some freezer instructions. If you wanted to, you can freeze the whole thing before you bake it. Just let it cool down completely, wrap it in some plastic, and put the whole tray like that in the freezer, and it'll stay fresh in there for a month or two. Then you can thaw it out the night before you're going to bake it, and just bake it until it's nice and bubbly. Every layer is already pre-cooked. You're just going to kind of cook it through and let it get nice and golden on top. However, I am not a fan of freezing bechamel, so I would freeze the meat and the veggie layers and then just make fresh bechamel and bake it the day that I want to serve it. I think that's the best way to serve it. But my aunt in Greece does it. Before we go to Greece, she has all this food ready for us in the freezer, and it comes out delicious, so it does work. Let me know if you've ever done it in the comment section down below. I'm going to clean up, and then once it comes out, we're going to do the taste test. So the moussaka is ready. I did let it cool for about 45 minutes. Technically, an hour is minimum that you want to wait before you serve this. So this is a perfect dish to serve at a party because you can make it early in the morning, just let it sit, and then just warm it through a little bit in the oven before you serve it. You could even pre-slice it. Some tips to make entertaining easy. This is all you need, a nice side salad, and you'll have a meal that is so delicious. In Greek, we say that which means it's finger licking good, basically. Anyway, it's time for the taste test. I already took out a piece very carefully because it was still really nice and warm. Let's see. Trying to get a little bit of everything, but I don't see a potato in here. There was a little bit of potato on the bottom. The eggplant literally melts in your mouth. The meat sauce is really nice and hearty. That cream sauce is money, you guys. So good. Cheesy, delicious. The potatoes also very good, melt in your mouth. I really prefer them over frying, so definitely do that. I don't know if I covered how you would bake the eggplants. If I did, forgive me for repeating myself, but I'll just repeat it one more time. You just basically lay them out in a few baking trays, brush both sides with olive oil, sprinkle with a little bit of salt, just a tiny bit because they've already been salted, and a little bit of pepper, and bake them until they're golden and nice and soft at 425. It's going to take about 20 minutes or so, pretty much. But you guys are going to want to serve this. You're going to want to make it for your family. The exact measurements are on the website, www.dimitrasdishes.com. If you do make it, share pics with me on Instagram and Facebook because I love seeing your recreations. Let me know what else you guys want to learn how to make next in the comment section, and I'll see you back next time. Yes, sis.